And as you know, I never felt guilty. I'll tell you why I did this. You know, first of all, I'm a successful writer, which is pretty unusual in America, and I own my own publishing company. And so I'm a upper middle class or a middle class person, and I did not have to get involved in this. This was not my source of income. And the reason why I got involved in it was because the city of Oakland asked me to help patients. And, you know, there are all kinds of sins in life, and we read about most of them that come out of the Ten Commandments in the daily papers, you know, based on lust, greed, robbery, lying, just basically the administration's basic. So you look at that, but then there are other sins too, and sort of sins of omission. When you see somebody who needs help and you say, I'm not going to render that person help, that's a sin. That's a sin as much as lusting after somebody else's wife or husband or whatever. So I felt, you know, I was living with this, and then when the city said, well, you have immunity, well, I had no excuse not to do it. And then there were personal things like, let's see, I can legally grow pot. Just the thought of that. You know, I should say that, you know, they say that the federal government says that pot's addictive. Well, I don't think that marijuana is really addictive, but growing it is. And so when I was given the opportunity to legally grow marijuana, I jumped at that. So anyway, so given that, given all these circumstances, it was inevitable that when I was arrested, that I would be fighting this. And I had just read a book a few months before I was arrested called The Tipping Point, which talks about movements and how movements form and how little things make big changes in society. And I think I was really fortunate in reading this book because it gave me insight into what was going to happen to me, what was happening to me, and what was going to happen to this issue. And after all of this, you know, the one thing that this did was change the paradigm in the way that people think about marijuana and that the way the press reports it. And this is exactly what the federal government was afraid of. This is what they've been trying to stop. And their doing this actually made me into a much better activist than I've ever been. You know, one of my ironic thoughts is that for 35 years I was trying to think, well, what would make me a more effective activist? How can I be a more effective activist? How can I get this into the media so I could be speaking at places like the Independent Institute instead of at mass rallies and things? So, and the federal government found it out for me. And, you know, so let this be a warning. You better be careful what you wish for. So, now, the real question is, why does the federal government want to do this? What do they have in it? What's their vested interest in this? And I want to go into I have two ideas about this. The first is that they really hate marijuana more than any other drug, whether it's legal or illegal. And the reason for that, whether you're talking about tobacco, alcohol, amphetamines, cocaine, heroin, all of those drugs ultimately make you dysfunctional in one way or another, or can kill you, you know. And the problem with marijuana, as far as the police are concerned, is that there is no payback to the people. They don't get any dysfunction from it. They might be happier than the police are. It doesn't fit the Puritan ethic that if you have enjoyment, that in some way you have to pay for it. And I think, in a way, that's the psychology of the police. But there's something much more important, that the whole criminal justice industry is based on arrests and on catching criminals. And so if you decriminalized or regulated marijuana, then 8% of their budget would be down the drain. 8% of their budget. 1 out of every 12 arrests. 1 out of every 12 jails. 1 out of every 12 cop cars. 1 out of every 12 judges. It goes on and on down the line, so that we're talking about a tremendous amount of money. And the marijuana war cost the federal government and the federal government and the state governments, that means us, really, somewhere between $15 and $30 billion a year. And I'll give you some quick statistics on that. There are about 730,000 people who were arrested for marijuana last year, 88% of them for simple possession. There are probably between 100 and 150,000 people in prison right now for marijuana. There are 20,000 people in federal prison for marijuana right now. It costs the government $1.5 billion just to house that small town of 20,000 people. Half of those people are Hispanic, so that there are 10,000 Hispanic people in prison, in federal prison, just for marijuana. And, so if you can think of how much resources is spent on that, it's incredible. So let's give a hypothetical. Let's say tomorrow everybody stopped using illegal drugs, or let's say they just stopped using marijuana. Everybody stopped using marijuana. So the police went out to arrest people. There was nobody to arrest. Nobody was selling marijuana on the street. Nobody was using it in their homes. It wasn't being used. It would be disaster for the DEA. Could you imagine that? Now look, DEA has had a pretty good growth period over the last 65 years. In 1937, when the tax stamp came in, there were estimated to be 55,000 users. Last year there were 730,000 arrests. That's about 13, the arrests totaled 13 times the number of users when marijuana was originally regulated. There are 25 million users for the feds and state authorities to poach upon. They've had a tremendous success. If you take a look at these statistics, statistical impossibility is going to happen sometime around 2020, where there'll actually be more marijuana users in the United States than there are people. So, let's see. Now, I wanted to step back for a moment from this and get into what this is all about. And, let's say we were talking about a river and how we were going to use this river. And, there'd be all the stakeholders in this river and the water that this river provided would get together and talk about it. You might have farmers and urban people and urban communities and environmentalists, and maybe there would be fishermen might get involved in it. And together they'd reach some sort of compromise that probably nobody would like, but that everybody could live with or sort of live with. So let's look at the stakeholders in terms of medical marijuana. Well, you have the patients, you have the doctors, you have the providers, you have caregivers, you have manufacturers, and all of these people have something to lend to the discussion. You have the public health service, they might have something to say about it. All insurers might have something to say about it because they might have to pay for it. But where are the police in this? Where's the criminal justice system in this? What's their stake in this? They claim to have a stake in that. What do they have a right to poach upon people, to poach upon sick people? Just what is their stake in it? And this is the problem. Their stake in this is arrests. They need arrests, or else they can't justify their budgets. And that's what this whole thing is all about. And that's why this is we will hear later that this is a culture war, and this is part of the culture war, whether they have a right to arrest a certain group of people because they're using this substance